Okay, so we're discussing material design and Angular 10.1, and we're looking at the stepper component, and we're going to look at an additional feature about labeling and optional steps now. So let's take a look at the documentation. I navigate to components. I go down to my stepper component, and I'm going through some of the examples. Now, feel free to go through the examples yourself, but I like going through them in fine detail. I like describing the way I perceive what is happening with these demos, but it might be useful to go through and analyze what you need to analyze. So right now I'm going to look at this particular demo, which is the stepper label a bottom position. What this demo is demonstrating is we know that the stepper component is this workflow style wizard where each step is a form. We've discussed the fact that the state of the step can be mapped to an icon, a mat icon, which out of the box has different flavors, and you could also customize those. The label for each step really is some text which can be on the right side of the icon or the bottom of the icon, and so we're going to discuss that position. And we'll also, as you navigate through the steps, you're submitting these form groups and validating the data. And we also have the concept here that we're going to discuss with an optional step, and I'll go through the different variations of that. So let's go through the example first. Notice here that I basically can fill out. Let's first look at what happens when I don't fill it. Okay, so when I don't fill the step out, notice it's still labeled as 1, and so you could tell it's not done because the icon will change to the edit mode, the edit icon. So and it's not a linear step. So it didn't mandate that I filled in the first form. So let's go back and just take a look at that. Let me type in my name. And notice I'm on the second step here. And now the icon is edit. I could go back here and edit, or I can go next. This particular mat step has a form. It's pointing to a form group. The mat stepper, the mat horizontal stepper is basically saying, okay, I don't have to validate it because it's not denoted as linear. So I'm going to move to the next step, number 2, but I'm still showing the icon as in edit mode, which you can go back and modify it. And there's no concept of the fact of whether this is valid data or not. It's mandatory. There's an asterisk here. The validation rule is that the form field should be mandatory, but it's not linear. So it's basically saying, you can go back and edit it. That form is not valid, and you can go back and edit it if you want to, etc. But let's not get too caught up in details. Now we're at the second step. Where the fill out your address is labeled. It's on the bottom of the icon, which is different than the default behavior, but we've configured it to be on the bottom. So this step is optional. So I'm going to go here, but notice this icon. I'm on the third step here now. This icon state did not turn to edit, meaning that it's an optional step. So by default, this icon still shows it too. Now if I go here and I type in the address and then I move the 3, even though it's optional, this icon state tells me, hey, you filled something there. Let's go back to that form just very quickly. Notice the address is mandatory field. There's a validation rule with this form that says it's required, but it's an optional step. So when you go to step 3, you are at step 3. You do have data in this form, Does it adhere to the validation requirements of the form? I don't know what the validation requirements of the form at this point. I didn't look at the code yet. Most likely, it's required to type something into that field, and whether there has to be some sort of format is another question. The same here. So since this is not a linear stepper, that is, the stepper does not have the linear directive associated with it, what is going on behind the scenes from the implementation perspective is really no concern for the user at the moment. It's really an implementation concern, but from a user navigating through the steps, they were capable of navigating through the steps regardless. And if there was a submit button here, there would be a submit button here. This form is not valid. It's optional. Uh, this this first step could be validated properly, etc. So we're not too concerned right now with the background implementation. We're just using this as a user. So let's go now and look at, let's reset this for the moment. Let's go look at the certain aspects of the demo. And so the demo really is just trying to say, oh, your labels could be on the right of the icon. You could put them on the bottom. And this step really could, same thing with this step. The label is on the bottom of the icon, not to the right. But this step is also optional. So there's several things there that are going on. So let's take a look at the code, and let's just play around with it a little bit to get a better feeling for what this thing is all about. And I'm sorry if I skip over a lot of details here, but I'm assuming that you folks are looking at this documentation and analyzing and have enough Angular knowledge to understand it. And I'm just pointing out some high-level things. I'll supplement my Matt Stepper documentation and demos with something more concrete, like, for example, how to implement internationalization, stuff like that. But let's just go through these examples. I'm a strong believer in saying, what comes out of the box? How do I use it? Do I need to change it? Minimize my coding, deliver what I need to deliver. So that's where I'm at. So let's look at the project here on the left. We know that this particular demo but is a particular project. We know that we have a couple of files here. The Angular JSON file is really describing what my project is all about, my whole project workspace. Do I have one application? Do I have multiple applications? What's my main module? Am I using? What kind of styling am I using? What's my style sheet? There's all this information here which documents my project. And then I got the package JSON file that says, these are all the packages I'm using in development mode or production, and these are all the commands I have. And I could look at this thing and say, okay, I'm using Angular 10. By the way, the documentation says Angular 10.1. I don't know if you noticed it, but I looked at it, it bumped up to 10.1. I'm looking at this example and it says 10.0. So I noticed there are some problems with the documentation since they did the upgrade to 10.1. So I'm not gonna, it's just an observation. I'm not gonna complain about what's happening here, but the truth is the documentation is up at 10.1 for Angular material design with what I'm looking at, but this example is running at 10.0. But the important thing to realize is what versions are you running? You know, so the RxJS version 6.5.5, that's good news. I'm running 10.0 for all the Angular stuff and the material design stuff. That's good news. My TypeScript is at 3.9.5. Very good news. So that's what that file is all about. Then the tsconfig gives me my TypeScript options, which even though I'm an advanced programmer, yes, this is a critically important file. But from the perspective of having the TypeScript working, this file says, I'm running a TypeScript file on my project. Here's my compiler options. Hey, if something doesn't work, I'll come here, but I'm assuming everything is going to work. So if you look at all the compiler options and you understand what they are and what your target is, and you're happy with the way things are going, just leave it be. If there's a problem with it, then you've got a problem. And of course, this app extends the the project workspace TypeScript file. So think of this as, okay, I got multiple applications and I could have different attributes of my TypeScript in those applications. Once again, leave it alone unless there's an issue and address it. And then you've got your tslint file, which gives you the rules when you're coding. If you do a double equal sign and it should be a triple, it'll give you a warning and you could dynamically point and click and fix it. This is always good. Let's just quickly see what this looks like in Angular 10, because this has been changing from Angular 6 to Angular 10, and I'm always trying to figure out. So this is a pretty extensive file. It's extensive enough for me to get started with an Angular 10 project. Very happy with what I'm seeing here. So this is good news. In the past, we would take Angular 6 best practices, ES6 best practices, blah 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 blah. Bottom line is now, Word has it. Angular 10 is now using the ES6 lint rules. I don't want to get into it now. We'll look at that in a different in our course on the Angular project foundations and workspace, etc. So let's move on. Let's get to the crux of things. So the important thing to realize here is that we all know that the Angular JSON file is really defining my project, and it defines where my builds go. It defines my main application, which is main.ts. It defines my main style sheet, which is styles.scss, and it's going to point to different things, different just to set up my project, and so when I generate a project and the scaffolding happens, this file gets created, and I'm ready to go. So here there's different things being specified, and like I said, we'll go through this in great detail. What I was looking for, and some of these parameters are really important: optimization, output hashing, source map, extract the CSS, etc. Okay, so this is what I was looking for. So the index.html is the main index.html. It's a single page application. The application is running, the root component is running in the index.html. The main program is really the module. The module is bootstrapped, and the root component is booted, and the index.html is rendering that custom root component. So that's where we are. So let's go navigate into those things very quickly. So here is my main.ts. My main.ts is really defining, the application module, which is getting bootstrapped. So this is my Angular application, and it turns out that it's the main app module. It's booting a root component. The root component has this UI component tree, and loosely speaking, I'll just leave it at that. The index.html is going to show my root component. But let's just see what this thing is doing real quick. Okay, we use HTTP module for web service calls. We use the forms module, the reactive forms module. So each one of these steps is a form, possibly a form, and we need these form modules, reactive form modules. There are some other things here which I don't want to get into. The demo material design is a module which points to all my material design components that I might need, my modules, my components. It gives me access to everything I might need in material design, and if I need something, I just use it. And then there was this tricky thing here, which was this injection token, which defines characteristics of all the form field attributes in my application. So over here, inside my main module that's getting bootstrapped, basically I'm listing it as a provider, and I'm using value appearance fill. And once again, changing that to outline gives me a different look and feel on the form. So let me just leave it at that. Leave it like that just to see how that looks as I play around with it. But I could always go back and change it. So this is the main module. There's nothing really too complicated about it. The important thing to realize here is that, in my eyes, it's really it's a small application, but it's really architected pretty nicely. I got my demo material module, which everything I need. I have my main root component, which is getting bootstrapped down here, and this is the component template that the index.html is going to use, and so using that custom selector tag in my index.html is going to give me access to my Angular application component tree. So let's go over here and take a look at this. So this is where the stepper label position example tag is. So this is the selector for the root component that's embedded inside my index.html. Notice my index.html does contain all my material icons link. It's linking to all my material icons. The application module is pointing to the material design module, which has all of my material design imports for all the modules. They're all exported from this module, giving my custom application module access to these things. And so, loosely speaking, I'm building an application now, which is a stepper, which has material design capability, and I could use any feature I want from material design because my main custom app module is importing this material module, and this material module is exporting everything I might need. So there's this concept of they're in my scope of my application. I could use them in my components. So let's go to the so this is like I said, this is called demo material design. Take it, copy it, call it my material design module, and just use it in your app module. And so let's look at the custom component. So the custom component that I'm building at my root component that's being embedded in my index.html is really providing the state behind this template, which is showing this functionality. So I have to look at the component template as a whole. So the component is using the component for the annotation. It's using the on init to implement an on init so I could define functionality that gets invoked after this object gets constructed. And then I also point to my selector, and this is my template, which is going to have all these tags. So what I'm constructing here, and of course I didn't do any of this, but I'm just giving you my interpretation of what is happening here, is that there's a template and there's an object. There's going to be an object and there's going to be a template. And they're kind of viewed as one. It's a component template. But Angular, what Angular is going to do for me, material design is going to do for me, it's going to do a lot of stuff from the templating perspective, from the state management perspective, the dynamic binding going back and forth, etc. And all I'm doing is I'm going in here and I'm just doing some simple customization of what I want to happen and how I want it to happen. I'm sort of like tweaking. So this is, I don't mean to preach Angular. I am an Angular bigot. I've done a lot of development in a lot of terms of my life. Yes, Angular is complex, but doing it right and having the framework do what you need to do for you is really what should be happening. And this is what's happening in this particular example. So if you look at the stepper label position button example, this particular component, what you'll see is there's two form groups. The first form group and the second form group. Now, what is a form group? Well, it's really the state of my step, right? So when the object gets instantiated, what happens is the constructor is TypeScript is going to say, okay, declare this private. This form builder type attribute or property is going to be implicitly associated with my object when it gets constructed, and the form builder is really this. I'm probably not going to use the right terminology, but think of it as this builder component, which is helping me very quickly build a group of build a form with controls, initial values, and validators. And so, very simply, my form group, this particular form group, the first form group, I use the form builder to group a control with an initial value and a validator. That's this thing right here. This step has a form group, and when I click next, it's going to submit the value into this state of this object. Okay? And then you've got the second form group. Same thing. You got the form builder grouping the second control with some validators and some initial values. And so here, let's suppose I went here and I said, I just put something here like 1 Main Street. The value would come up automatically. I mean, I could change it if I wanted to. Let's go back here, and that's typically not done, but it's possible there could be a need for you to do that. There's no doubt. So this object basically is doing that. Now the object, the annotation, component annotation does point to a template. There is a template URL. There's a selector, a template URL, and there's a style sheet URL. Notice this is CSS, which is kind of interesting. But let's now look at the template. Okay, so we know what this thing is doing. It's got the state of my objects, but the template's the one that's controlling the location of the label. It's also controlling, that this step is optional or not. So let's go look at the template to just look at those things and assess them. There's really nothing in the style sheet here, but we'll take a look at that in a minute. Okay, so the template is this. We have a mat horizontal stepper, and it really encapsulates this whole file. This is the end of the stepper down here. So we have a mat horizontal stepper, and so notice when I look at the functionality, it says label position is the bottom. So that's why you see the label on the bottom. So what we could do is just very quickly remove this, see what happens, and you see that your labels go to the right. Okay, so that's how we control the label position at the mat horizontal stepper level. The pound stepper is a reference. It's basically declaring that this stepper variable is a reference to this horizontal stepper, and so when I want to reset the form, it uses that reference to reset the stepper, and the stepper will go through and reset each form. Okay, now let's take a look at the mat step. Now we went through the mat step several times, but let's go through it very quickly again. The mat step is declaring its step control to be the first form group. Okay, so this is binding the step to this first control group. Now the first control group is a form, and it's got this first control with this initial value being 0, and a validation rule being required inside the form. And this mat step form, when I click next, the stepper and the mat step, in conjunction with each with the the component itself will basically validate the data, and based on whether the stepper is linear or not, it will determine what to do. So here, to give you an example, I could move forward, and this let's see, let's go back here for a moment. I could move forward now, and this is in edit mode, and I come back here. If I remove this, you know, the red shows me it's mandatory, but I did click next, and this still shows number 1, which means that it doesn't meet the requirements for the validation rule. So you still need to do that step. Visually, it's telling me that. So the step control is the form group. The form is basically defined as the first form group, and so this directive basically says this form is mapped to the form group, and then this template is really the mat step label. So the mat step has a mat step label. This directive basically says use this text for your label. Just to show you how that changes, it changes over here. Okay, so then you have your input. Your input is, you know, there's a placeholder here which shows last name, first name, etc. And then you have your mat input here, which is basically helping with the implementation of what's happening as you're interacting with this thing. And your form control is pointing to the first control, which means this form has a form group. Inside that form group is the first control. The form control name equals is going to map the value in this field to that attribute named first control. And this says it's required. So let's look at this code again. You do have a form group with a first control, and as a validator, and it's defined as empty initially. So when we come back here, that's basically what this thing does, is it maps that value to that form field. Now let's take a look at the second step. Now notice the second step has this attribute called optional. It's optional. The second step is optional. It's at the mat step level. So here's your stepper. Embedded, you have a mat step, and it's optional. So the mat stepper now knows what to do. Okay, it knows that it knows that it doesn't have the changed icon, and it's an optional step. And you might not see what that really means, but I'll show you in a minute. So here, right now, I typed in this value. Okay, let me go back here. Okay, notice this icon turns editable. Now, I could do two things at the second step here. I could either navigate, and the icon still turns to is still a grade 2, which means you don't have to go back and edit it. You do have to. You might have to still. You can go back and edit this thing, but this is optional. So let's see what happens when I put in an address here. It's the same. It's the same thing. So let's reset this thing and go back and take a look at it. So why is this so important? It's a little bit confusing from the example here. I'll show you. I'm going to go back up to the mat horizontal stepper, and I'm going to make it linear. Now at this point, I cannot move forward unless I type this field in, because now it's a linear stepper. So now I put in my name, if I could spell my name, and now I go to the next field. Even though I could go back and edit this thing, this form has been validated. Since it's linear, it's been validated, and my form control now has the state of that first attribute. But over here, I could still bypass this thing and go to the next step. So there's the big difference here. So this optional capability really showed its true colors when I turned the stepper into a linear stepper. So, and then you got your last step, which basically said you are now done, and there's a back and a reset button. And the only thing, so there was the template which said done, and there was a mat step label, and the only thing here that's important is that there is the previous button, the mat stepper previous directive is important because it's really the mat horizontal stepper which is doing the navigation. As a matter of fact, the horizontal stepper has a base class called CDK stepper, and that thing is controlling the navigation. And there's this validation of forms and everything and resetting, which is being done at this base class level, and so it's all working very nicely and smoothly as a whole. And so the stepper is just a reference to the horizontal stepper, and you're resetting. So when we click on this thing here, we basically go back. The stepper resets the form fields and clears them out, and you're back to square one. So it wasn't a very sophisticated example, but it's interesting to see that I've got all this functionality by essentially not doing too much. Now, I didn't write this code example, but I think it's fantastic I think it's really impressive that I have a template, I have an object, they both seem very manageable to me, and out-of-the-box functionality that I get out of this thing is fantastic. Now, needless to say, when I get to the done field, I have to eventually, submit something and call a web service and persist. But from an architectural perspective of Angular 10 and Material Design 10, and how this is working for me and what it's given me as an application developer, I'm very pleased with it. Now, you could have a million people come up to you saying, well, I want the text on the top of the icon, I want all these different things. And you say, you know what, this is good enough. And let's just focus on the functionality before we start going crazy with customizing. You can change the icons based on the state. You can map icons to state. There's a state for each one of these steps, and there's an icon that shows during that state. You can do that. We'll take a look at that. But I think we're done with this example, and I think it's good to go through these things and really take a look at every single feature of this stepper, because this is a very important component in application design and development that will handle any questionnaire for any use case, and we'll take a look at other things like the expansion panel that would also help you do some of these things. So that's all I want to show for this particular demo. Let's move on to other interesting things.